get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here, for those who are visiting our class as well. And thank you for the students. Okay, we have the pleasure of having Professor Suni Manchulao, and I'm gonna introduce her, and we will get started. Dr. Suni Manchulao, full professor at Bishop's University in Quebec, Canada, is Canada Research Chair Tier 2 in Integrated Plurilingual Teaching and Learning. Her research focuses on teachers' cross-language and cross-curricular collaborations to mobilize students' entire semiotic repertoire for language and content learning for critical engagements. As co-researcher into recent SSHRC-funded projects, she explores as well multilingual approaches to assessment in education and the promotion of critical media literacies in plurilingual and pluricultural teacher education. She co-edited the book Plurilingual Pedagogies, Critical and Creative Undertakings for Equitable Language in Education with Professor Saskia Van Wiegen in 2020. She serves as co-editor of Critical Inquiry in Language Studies. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Manchulao to this session of our research colloquium. Thank you, Sumi, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Picado, for inviting me to share my research work here. I was also an OIC graduate, and I remember taking the colloquium classes like you do now. So it's great. I love going back to OIC and being able to support new scholars. And so, okay, I'm just looking at, okay, sharing my screen. Okay, okay, let me have it done first and I will start talking. Can you all see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to share it here. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, thank you again for allowing me this great opportunity. I'd like to start by acknowledging that Bishop's University sits on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki people and the Wabanaki Confederacy. Where we are is called Eastern Townships. So it is 1.5 hours east of Montreal. And also maybe 3 hours from Quebec City. The first inhabitant here in this area were the Abenaki people, and early settlers were American, English, and Irish. And later, with the waves of French colonization, the Anglophone communities are dwindling. So the town where we are was originally a predominantly Anglophone town, but now English speakers make up less than half of the population. So in Quebec, particularly, it is, okay, I'm going to jump a little bit here. Oh, sorry, I should have another slide. Oh, okay, maybe I did not include that slide. Okay, in Quebec, it's you know about a little bit about the history. The linguistic restrictions can be traced back to Bill 101. Which is the French language charter established to protect the French language and also French culture. And under the law, all immigrant students are required to go to French schools. In Quebec, schools are organized along linguistic lines. So we have Anglophone schools, and so Anglophone school boards, and then the Francophone school boards. Now they call it service centers. And so under Bill 101, all immigrant students have to be funneled into the French system. And if you look at the Canadian history, you will see that there's always the promotion of linguistic duality, and that is the two official languages, as well as multiculturalism, but not multilingualism. So languages spoken by immigrants or indigenous peoples were never on the agenda. Although recently there was the introduction of Indigenous Languages Act, increasingly people begin to recognize the need to maintain, revitalize, and promote indigenous languages. In Quebec in particular, these labels are very, very predominant. Like when you come here, you will immediately be boxed into either category. So either your Anglophones or your Francophones or Allophones, despite the fact that, for example, even though I may speak French, but I will always be seen as Allophones. It is also tied to race relations. So, okay, so this is the Canadian context, as I mentioned earlier. And so this really reflects what De Sousa Santos mentioned about abyssal thinking. So there's a line drawn. So there is us, and then there is the other. So a lot of minoritized languages and knowledges are being seen as not relevant or non-existent. And often we position plurilingual individuals as language deficient or inferior, and even sometimes languageless, as suggested by the term allophones. In recent years in the field of applied linguistics and bilingual education, and I'm sure you've covered a lot on this already, right? So there is the so-called trans movement or the plural turn, and we have so many of these very similar terminology. They all signal a general desire to overcome and destabilize boundaries and borders between named languages, and also between language and other semiotic means of communication. So language is no longer seen as standalone, but rather as being interconnected and integrated as communicative repertoire, together with other languages and other semiotic means like art, music, dance. And we also begin to adopt a more dynamic and ecological view of language. And we are all communicative repertoire exists in that system, which is uneven, incomplete, and always developing, always changing as we move to different locations or as we engage in different communicative practices. And as plurilingual speakers, we often assemble communicative features from different languages and semiotic resources for meaning making. So I want to only focus on these two main concepts because I mainly draw on these two main concepts to help me frame my work. And I know in the field there has been a lot of debate on the differences, and we don't have time to cover this today, but I think we can safely say that they share a similar vision. And so, for example, plurilingualism, a vision of language teaching and learning that does not isolate language instruction, but rather positions it in relation to other languages. So there is the recognition that even though we're just learning the target language, other languages, especially languages of our students, is important. It has a place to do in the target language classroom, because then we can intentionally and strategically cultivate transferable language skills, knowledges, and also the ability to learn across languages. And translanguaging highlight particularly the more ideological and political and power structures that divide languages. So the idea is to empower both the learner and the teacher to transform power relations and focus on the process of teaching and learning, on making meaning, enhancing experience, and developing identity. So the idea is because we use language as a tool to learn, and so the idea is not just to master the language. Well, okay, I have to be careful with the use of the word master. Not only to use the language, but use the language for real social purposes. I think that is the most important thing. And for me, the reason why I draw on these plural or trans theory is the idea that we can then promote critical literacy and intercultural education. So it's not because this is hip or this is, I think the major critique of translanguaging or plurilingualism is that we're promoting a more cosmopolitan plurilingualism or multilingualism. But I think for me is the idea we draw on different languages so that students will be fostered the ability to translate, transpose, and critically reflect on the social, cultural, and historical meaning conveyed by the structure of the language. So the idea is that they can see how worldviews, cultures, beliefs, values, practices are being conveyed or shaped by languages, and how we learn a different language is for us to engage in this transculturation process, being able to understand and expand our knowledge. Rather than thinking that our knowledge is universal, we begin to understand that people can look at things very differently. There are multiple, as what Batin said, multiple consciousnesses, encounter of different linguistic consciousnesses, so that we can have a dialogue between diverse worldviews and become reflexive of who we are as a culture, and then challenge so-called linguicism, whose language is better or whose worldview is better, but rather to understand that there are different ways of understanding things, and there could be the socio-political conditions that has upheld one knowledge over the next or over the other, and that we have to be careful how we partake in the promotion or the deconstruction of such arbitrary hierarchy. And that is my interest on critical literacy, and it started with my PhD study. So you can take a look at this. So at the time, I created a framework to guide my critical literacy work. And recently, I had the opportunity to work with a group of Norwegian researchers. The project was on promoting the use of literature in the language classroom. And so as a group, we updated the framework with contribution from everybody. And so the idea is to have these four integrated 4 dimensions. The textual dimension refers to the intentional teaching and learning of the multimodal design features, and to understand how they convey meaning and how they also position the reader or the viewer's position. Discover the use of language and stylistic devices. So this is what we call a textual dimension, and we have a big, like a wider, more expansive understanding of text. Text is not just linguistic, so it can be musical, it can be spatial, it can be visual. And then importantly, as we read or view any text, we have to activate learners' prior knowledge, and they have the opportunity to share the experiences and make connections to other texts, make connections to themselves, and make connections to the world, so that they can then begin to investigate how the text positions them as reader or viewer, define and interpret gaps and ambiguities, consider multiple perspectives and cultural lenses in the text in the classroom. By like having the opportunity to hear what other people are thinking and reading, and to understand that they read it also from their own worldviews. This is the starting point for critical intercultural education. Because, you know, the same language, or the same words or the same text we're reading, but we are contributing, we're reading it through our different lenses. And so by having the opportunity to share, we also have the opportunity to see how different worldviews are shaping our understanding of the text. So the idea at the end is we can then come up with creative and transformative actions to address the issues being addressed. And you can see in the middle, we want to bring all the cognitive, affective, and social aspects together. So they're not separate. So basically, this is what I've been doing in the past. And I want to share with you 2 studies. Hopefully I have time to do that. So the first study is a collaborative action research that I worked with an ELA and French second language teacher in an Anglophone elementary school. And the idea is to explore how the cross-language and cross-curricular collaboration in engaging students in critical inquiry can facilitate their complex biliteracy and critical literacy learning, and also to promote their identity as competent bilingual users and agents of social change. So this has always been the research methodology I use. For me, this is not just a methodology, but it's also onto epistemology, and that is how we know the world. It is always, it's not about doing research hidden in the laboratory, but rather working in the field with real teachers and students, and we build theory from the ground up, and we then through recursive processes of planning, acting, and reflecting, then we come up with actionable and contextualized plurilingual pedagogies, and to generate theory that is, as I said, from the ground up, and that is for me, it's a very important way of understanding research and also teacher education. So part of it is also the ongoing engagement with the field. So this project, actually it was funded by 2 kinds of funding. The first one is a university, like a New Scholar Fund. So we worked for the first 2 years, and then the 3rd and 4th year, we got the SHIRK grant to continue with the project. But you can see here, what is interesting is after the first year, let me see. No, okay, I'm going to share later on, okay, in a few minutes, I'm going to share with you a picture. After the first year, we actually got the school board's approval to create a multi-age classroom. And the teacher, because they were also very eager to continue their work on critical literacy and their cross-language collaboration. And so they got approval from the ministry so they can create a grade 4 to grade 6 multi-age classroom. They break down a wall between 2 classrooms so that they can have a big classroom. And the 2 teachers are always there with the 2 groups of students. So which has become one big group of students, a multi-age classroom. So this is really, this speaks to the importance of, you know, that changing perspective of language as interconnected. So when we first started, the 2 teachers are grade 3 teachers. They have experimented with some collaboration because they were very, as I've said, that they're very interested in promoting critical literacy. They teach each other's English language arts, and respectively English language arts and French second language. And so they will sometimes bring students together, try to find some kind of convergence and using similar themes maybe. And when they get together and discuss some social issues, they will always do it in English. And so when I came on board and we started planning for our research, we would like to try out, really try to find where we can link the two languages and also the curricula in a more effective way. So the first year when we started, we thought of using a year-long theme, which they have used before. But this time we try to be a bit more systematic, try to link English and French, and if possible, for example, other subjects like social studies or math even. So the theme is children's rights. The goal is to help children understand universal children's rights, and not all these rights are equally respected around the world. Discover ways to ensure that their and their peers' rights are protected. Develop ways to reach out to children beyond the community whose rights are threatened. So we started with a general introduction of children's rights, which I did not show here. After that, so we share this general introduction in English first, and then we get into the little sub-skills. And we always started with something simpler in French, because these students are learning French as a second language. Although there are always some students, it's quite mixed, as I've mentioned earlier, in this town. So outside classroom, it all depends on the family. Many of the children will join like football team or hockey team that will function in French, or swimming team. So there's a lot of exposure, and so that is quite hybrid. And there are some families who are francophone, but then because of the language rights, they can still send the kids to English school. So there are also cases like this. But the majority are more English dominant. So we'll start some concepts that are simpler in French first. For example, here they were looking at different scenarios or objects or things that we should have, like protection or housing or family care. And so they're learning all these new French vocabulary, and also the use of definite, indefinite articles. But at the same time, this is contextualized in something about children's rights. And then in the English class, they begin to go on and read something way more complex. So they read scenarios based on the language rights, and they engage in a discussion, which is, again, never black and white. We really want to encourage students to think deeper and to support their understanding with evidence. So we'll see a lot of discussions like fair, unfair, or unsure. And we will prompt students to make sure that they provide the reasons why. And that is the most important thing for us. Critical literacy is not dogmatic training. There's only one right answer, but to foster them to begin to look at different perspectives and evaluate them. And so then eventually we read the different articles of children's rights, and the children choose a language right. They can elaborate it and illustrate it in English or in French. And then we created a children's rights quilt outside the classroom. And this quilt actually generated a lot of discussions in the hallway, because as teachers and children from other classes pass by and they begin to point at things, look at things. So it becomes a public display, and also an opportunity for further discussion on children's rights. There are quite a lot of activities, but I want to highlight this one because this is really an illustration of how we bring the two languages together. And we want to experiment with that. So in one class, we asked, at the time it is still grade 3. So one group, one class, when they have the French class, they were reading articles, I think it's 21 to 43 in French. And in the English class, the other class, in English, they read articles 1 to 20. And so that morning they did that. And in the afternoon, we brought the two classes together. So one class, they have read the English articles from 1 to 20. The other class, the French class, they had read articles 21 to 43. And so what we did is to ask students, we give them one article, and they have to go around and read their peers' article, and then they have to decide to create groups, which is like a concept formation task. So they have to say, oh, these articles seem to be speaking about the same thing, and we're going to give it a name, give the group a name. So the idea is for them to categorize all these different articles. So you can see they were going around and reading each other's articles, either in French or in English, and they have to negotiate and say, oh, yes, I think our two articles are talking about the same thing, and they seem to be talking about what? So what is the key concept here? So just to let you know, the children's rights, the Charter of the Children's Rights, they actually divided the different rights into 3 categories: participation, protection, and provision. I think the activity is really interesting in the sense that we are really promoting that concept, more high order thinking. So instead of just telling the children that these are the 3 categories, the 2 teachers gave them this task so that they can go talk to each other across languages, and then to find common themes. And so at the end, okay, so I don't know if you can, I'm going to play the video clip a bit. I don't know if you can hear it. Okay, let me know if you can hear it. Oh, go back. Can you hear the video?
Beginning we seem to, but now can you?
Okay, I stop it. I stop. So you can hear. Okay, good. So I'm going to play a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. No, we can't. No. Can you go? If you go near you put micro same as the system. You should.
Should I stop sharing and then?
No. On the share, you go down underneath. Well, if you see the bar, where there is the, or you can stop sharing a moment. It's probably easier for you. You go near the mic, and there is this little arrow, and make sure that under select the speaker, you have a same as a system.
Okay.
In that case, we should be able to hear it.
Okay, let me do it again. Oh yeah, share sound. Okay.
And select the speaker, share same as system.
Commencer l'activité, on vous a dit que vous deviez trouver un...
Can you hear?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, good. I'll do it again.
Commencer l'activité.
Yeah.
Commencer l'activité, on vous a dit que vous deviez trouver un groupe, si c'était possible. On le voit ici que c'est pas toujours nécessairement possible. OK? Mais qu'on aimerait que vous essayiez de trouver un nom à votre groupe. Pourquoi vous vous êtes mis ensemble? Et qu'est-ce qu'il y a? C'est quoi le lien, la connexion qu'il y a entre vous? Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui serait prêt à partager pourquoi ils sont ensemble? On a un gros groupe en arrière là.
Okay, Marcus, what name did you give to your group, or why are you all together?
Okay, so I just give you a taste of it. So so they have finished the task, and these students, they found themselves, so they sit together because they found a group, and so they're going to say participation, protection, I think. And the kids sitting in the front because they couldn't find a group. And so later on, the teacher is going to read the kids the article they're holding, and then to brainstorm with the whole class together which group they should go to. So the idea is really, again, it's a concept formation task to help them to think what this article is about and what is the connection with other articles, and then to come up with a topic heading, a theme. And so, and you also see that the teachers, when they use the languages, they're using the languages not repeating themselves, but in like a continuation. And so the idea is that they're building on each other's knowledge. And this is also what we have been doing, going back and forth like this. In the end, we created a book called Do It Right, the ABCs of Children's Rights. And before we did this, we actually gave lessons on the use of, I have a research assistant who's working on this project. She gave lessons on the use of photography. So again, the semiotic means of communication, and how we take pictures to create a message. We brainstorm the ABCs and what these letters stand for that represent key words of this whole topic of children's rights. And so the children they can also draw the pictures, and they can write their paragraph describing this particular word. And you can see how they like perform the role of a plurilingual learner, and their respect for each other's multilingual resources. And so these are another example. So I mentioned earlier, after the first year, we got the school board's approval, and you can see this is the wall. And now it becomes an archway linking the two classrooms. And the students put their handprints there to indicate that this is the classroom that they belong to. And it means the kind of the togetherness, the sense of belonging. And I think it is very symbolic for us also, because it really breaks down the linguistic divide, but also a lot of very arbitrary divide between grade levels, and also the timetabling, because in the past, when you have French, then you have to line up, and then you move to another classroom. Then your French will be spoken there, and once it's done, then you will go back to your English classroom, and then you will never use your French again. So it means a lot to the students, because we have a lot of flexible groupings depending on where they are at. For example, math follows a different grouping, French follows a different grouping, English follows a different grouping. So they feel that they're always there's always support, and there's always people who are stronger in English, they're stronger in French in the group to help each other out. Another example, this is a third year year-long theme, celebrating diversity. And because as we move along, we also begin to find our way of collaboration. And so by year 3, we really become very clear where we can, where will be the best place to support our students and to make this cross-language and cross-curricular collaboration work to the best. We're thinking, because now we have grade 4 to grade 6 students, we're preparing students for ministry and also school board exams for English language arts and also French second language, where they will have to write a reading response. So a reading response is like a response to a literature, a piece of literature they have read, or or a piece of writing or video that they have watched, and to give their response. And so we decided that we are going to work on this theme and to read English and French children's literature alternatively, but then building on the concepts as we move along. So we start with something simpler. We start with the physical appearance, moving on to class differences. These two books about homelessness, and these two books about race. So and so we find that because the fact that we go back and forth, but deepening our conversations about differences and diversity in how it is socio-political a lot of times, and so their understanding becomes way more coherent and also deepened. We also use this idea from Vivian Vasquez on audit trail. So we put any activity, take pictures of books that we have read or activities that we have done, and then put an audit trail there. So whenever we're reading a new book, or whenever there's a guest coming into the classroom, the children can point out what we have done, what we have learned so far, and making links to the book that we are reading at the moment also, to trace back our thinking. So it is almost like a visual display of our collaborative inquiry and thought processes. And because we're preparing them for the reading responses, so we also create a gigantic message wall. So whenever we finish the oral discussion of a book, we then recap on the main theme, and then we write down the theme on the book and how the theme of the book relate to the previous books that we have read, whether it's English or French. And we encourage students to make links to French books that they have read if they're writing the English reading response also. And through this, we also learn that after the oral discussion, it is important that we will create one mind map together that is some kind of a summarization of the main theme. So here we have this book, The Other Side, and we have the characters, we have the symbolism, the use of symbolism in the book, the use of the illustration, the significance of the illustration. So we will do it together on the big screen together as a whole group. And then we ask students, before they write their own individual reading response, they will have to recreate their own the mind map first before they write. You can see that each re-semiotization, right? So because we're using different means of representing understanding and making knowledge also, because each means has its own unique affordances. And so by multiple use of these semiotic resources, we are supporting students to learn and be able to discover new meanings also. And we find that when we do this multiple times, because the oral discussion is one way of, making things clear, but not all students are paying attention. And so the mind map, the visual mind map, becomes a good tool. And then we also notice that students have to do it on their own also to make sure that they really understand. And then the individual writing. So each time we notice something different, and we begin to realize that all these are coming together to help them to write a reading response, because they can then see what they have missed. And especially children at this young age, they may not be able to plan that well. And so with the visual aid, they're able to see, okay, what they have done, what they have left out. And later in the French reading response, we actually also use different color scheme to help students to make sure that they cover everything also. So the characterization, the main message, the use of symbolism, the use of illustration. And at the end of that year, we held a individual differences conference. So it's like a poster session. We invited parents and also teachers and students, schoolmates to come. And so they each child they either they research into a topic inspired by the storybooks that they have read, or a topic that is that they're passionate about. So for example, this child, his brother has Down syndrome, and so he decided to work on this topic. And when we interviewed him, he said because of the inquiry that year, he now had a better understanding of his brother. So these are other students' work, and you can see part of this is in French. The last year, and I think this is the article that you asked to read. The last year, the theme is on immigrants and refugees, because it is still quite a the school where we are is still quite homogeneous, because it's, first of all, it's English school, and that's why, and all immigrants and refugees are funneled into the Francophone system. So that school is still quite homogeneous in a sense. And so we really want to engage students in understanding what diversity means, understanding people who are different from them. And that year, when we decided on this topic in August, like before the school started, we didn't know that that year, by October, the Syrian refugee situation became a world issue. And so it was really very timely. And we were reading storybooks like before, but we realized that something is missing, because they don't really see the urgency. So we began to reach out to communities. So we invited students from refugee background who were sponsored to come into our university, to come and talk to them, and the children. We worked together and come up with questions that we would like to ask them. And so this also become a literacy practice, and itself it is learning the language. And we also have another group of students, elementary and also CEGEP. They are the French speaking. So they come in, and the kids also then ask the question, they interview them in French. And so these students' stories, life stories, become the stories they read. So they, based on their life stories, they do their reading response. And also based on the stories, they I'm going to jump a little bit here. They created a play, a 3-act play. So the first act was about a political upheaval in Pakistan. And again, all the kids, they did they divide themselves into 3 groups, but they have meetings. So the whole class will meet and discuss. They will decide on the context, the story, the general storyboard, and this general storyboard based on the stories that they have collected and through the interviews, and also their own research. So they decided the context is in Pakistan, and then there's a family, and there was explosion, and then the family members got separated. So one very interesting thing about the writing of the script is that it became a very contentious issue whether the grandma will come back in the final act. And there was a great debate, and many children were like in tears. They said, no, we have to have the grandma back. They have to get reunited when they finally arrive in Sherbrooke, Quebec, because we have to have a good ending. They are talking about all these because we have invited all the interviewees that, they interviewed those immigrant students. So they were invited to watch the performance, and for them it is such an important message that they want to convey to them, that there is hope. And so for them it is a very cliche ending, but at the same time there is that projection of, you know, of hope and a bright future for the refugees and immigrants. One thing that we did is, earlier I was talking with Enrica about emotion. We find that particularly for critical literacy education, it's not so much about, you know, persuading children to know, okay, this is right or wrong. And I think a lot of times they know what is right and wrong, and as adults too. But somehow emotionally, we react to things unconsciously or at a subconscious level because we have values or we have beliefs that are sometimes unquestioned. And so it is important to connect with them at the personal level. That's why the framework that I showed you earlier, that affective side. So one of the projects we did to help the children to understand what it means to be, you know, in a very precarious situation, when you have lost a family, when you feel so lonely. So we asked them to do a painting, and that is a safe place. What is it to you? Okay, what is it like? What does it look like, a safe place? So again, we invited a nearby high school art teacher to come in and teach us some techniques in representing ideas in a two-dimensional space. How do we use color? How do we use visual symbolism to represent that notion, that idea of being lonely or being safe? So this is the interview, okay? So every student will do the painting, and then they do a caption. They can write it in English, or they can write it in French, or they can write in English and French. And so this student said, in this moment, he was just sitting alone, and this little creature and that little friendship, that was little seconds, it comforted him, like nothing dangerous can happen to him. So for her, a safe place is this very momentary sense of friendship, okay, and comfort that you can have through your companion. And so she said, when I was painting and going through what I wanted to show on my paper, I kind of felt it. Like I felt it. I know it wasn't possible, but drawing and making what I wanted, make it on paper, I felt like what the refugees were experiencing. And I think this is really very, very important for us, that they sense it through their at that emotional level, because I think it is way better than just rationally understanding the difficulties. And I want to share this also because this child thought, well, when the refugees come here, I think they must be very, very thankful because they're one of the people that came here. But when we interview one of the refugees, he said that he came alone. Like he didn't bring any of his family members with him. For him, the drawing of the picture reminds him that, oh no, even though they can come here, it doesn't mean, okay, this is the end of the story. This is happy ever after. Because the fact is still that they can't bring the family here. And so that realization is really precious, I think. Anyway, so so that was the last year of this project, and these are some of the students sharing. So they talked about how, because of the linking of the two languages, there's always this reciprocal learning opportunities and also changing of leadership roles. So for example, when we discuss in English, the English students will shine, and then when the discussion is in French, the French dominant student will shine. So it's really good. And we can see there's a lot of connections from the word level to writing and reading strategies. So for example, when they learn how to write reading responses in English, they use the same strategy in the French. The same with reading visuals, critical reading of illustrations. They've learned it in English because we deliberately teach it in English, and they can then apply it in French as well. So that was the first project, and I don't know if I have time. I know I have 6 minutes left. I will just quickly go for it, and then if you have questions, then I can explain a bit more. So the second project this time is a working with a Francophone college. So here Francophone college is like grade 12 and university year 1. And so the college here operates like a university also. So the students will go to a college after grade 11. So they will do 2 years of college and then they will apply to university. So here university is 3 years unless students are coming from out of province. And so we work with this time ESL and French teachers. One of my MA students, she is an ESL teacher at a Francophone college, and she found that there was a lot of immigrants and refugee students who are learning English and French as 3rd or 4th or 5th languages already, and yet a lot of times their languages are not being recognized. And so, so she was thinking, she took one of my classes and realized that, okay, this is something that her colleagues from the ESL department and also the French department can work together to support the immigrant student. And so we applied for funding and we got it, and then we started working together. So the first year we really tried to read each other's curriculum and try to understand, because it's a French college, so it is like a university, so they have courses to take. And so they may not share the same students, but they may share students like after 1 semester, the student will go to the ESL class. So do you understand what I mean? So that they may not share the same students in the same class at the same time, but they might come to the classes eventually. And by looking at the curriculum, even though they're different, because the French curriculum tend to focus a lot on literature, whereas the ESL courses tend to focus more on oral communication. But because they're all preparing students for academic reading and writing, so we see a lot of similarities, like writing academic paragraph. For example, the ESL classes will have topic sentences supporting details, and in French, they will have what they call idée principale, idée secondaire, and this is for the literary analysis, and which is like the reading response in English. And reading different text types. So for example, ESL tend to read a bit more information-based texts, news, videos, passages, but they also they can read poems, they can sometimes read stories too. Whereas the French courses, they tend to read a bit more literary text, graphic novels. But similarly, both curricula focus on grammar, explicit, but also there's also the lack of explicit teaching of reading and vocab learning strategies. They all think that, okay, students should have learned it in high school. A lot of should haves. But then a lot of times we find that students were never being taught explicitly, for example, text types or text features. And so once we identify these similarities and differences, we begin to think of how can we then bring the languages together and also validate, like mobilize students' plurilingual resources also. So we decided to use a common, like a theme-based approach, common theme-based approach. And we try to, so each instructor will do according to their course requirements, but then they try to, based on this theme about who am I, who's the other, and who are we, the idea is to deconstruct who's the other, because we can be othered. And who are we, okay, to promote that responsibility and reciprocity. So to promote the communicative competence and intercultural understanding. And promote respect of otherness instill openness to language and cultures. So I just share some of the things that we did. For example, in one French class, well, first of all, we deliberately choose text that has to do with people who are othered, minoritized groups. Okay, so for example, they reading graphic novel, and one of the key features in graphic novel is the use of onomatopoeia, the words that imitate sound. So the teacher invited students to share what is, like, how do you represent thunder? How do you represent telephone ring? How do you represent dog barks or cat smell in your own language? And the students write it on the board, and which was really fun to watch how it immediately became a meta discussion on vowels and consonants in different languages, which is really fun because they would say, oh, our language is similar because we use this, or we sound it the same or different. So it was really fun to see students are sharing and engage in that kind of metalinguistic discussion. And we begin to also identify key reading, viewing, listening strategies that can be used across any language. So for example, the intentional teaching of inferencing or predicting, connecting, summarizing, questioning, monitoring, and visualizing. And we also, in each class, we deliberately do, like, how do we prepare students to read the text? For example, using visuals to help them, to engage them in inferencing. What do you see here? Now, this is a map, right? Can you see that? It's all segregated. What is this suggesting? What does the title suggest? So even before they start reading, they already have a sense of what the article is about. So gathering all the semiotic resources to help them to learn, and then to teach also vocabulary, and also teach, like, deepen and expand the vocab knowledge, metalinguistic and also cross-linguistic, right? So inviting students to share, oh, does this word also remind you of a word in your own language? So we do a lot of things like that. And so, for example, this is another example, just by mentioning, in French class, you learn this, which is similar to what we're learning here. Then students won't think that, okay, they're learning something completely different. And of course, we also draw their attention to text types. So for example, in a literary response, we will write it like this. In a philosophy essay, we will write it like this because of what? So the disciplinary specific literacy skills is also highlighted so that they have this meta awareness. And we also invite them to share, does it look similar in your own language or in your own discipline? One last example. So this is another French teacher trying to include a story that is about Minotaur, who the story is based on this painting about Minotaur feeling very, very conscious of himself, also feeling very isolated because of his physical difference. So he's trying to open his doors, invite people to come, but everybody's afraid of him. And so before reading the story, we actually looked at different portrayals of Minotaur in the media, and to contrast how the portrayal is different and what is it telling us. So in the media, for example, because there are a lot of students playing these video games, and you can see how militant, all-powerful, masculine, and belligerent the Minotaur is being represented in the media. And yet in the story, what is highlighted is that sense of that self-consciousness of being different, and being not welcome because of his hybrid nature of his body. Well, maybe I'll share one more. so this is from the students. I particularly like this because the students is really telling us even a tiny gesture of inviting them to share the onomatopoeia in their own language. For them, it is valorizing. And the student said it makes her feel that she is not less. And she feels that she's the same. It's not like we're here only to learn French, but we are here to learn each other's languages and cultures also. She feels more equal. And I think that is really, really precious. And this, another student is talking about how the writing is similar. And this student's talking about the transferable reading and writing strategies. And he said it can also be applied in Spanish. And for him, this is pretty much the first time he learned those strategies, because he said those strategies do not come to his mind naturally. And so the explicit teaching really helped him a lot. I'm going to stop here and let me see. Okay. Yes, make sure that we have time for discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Suni, for this wonderful, interesting way of collecting data as well, and studies, and explaining them to us. We stop the recording now with